The following is a special report from 59 News. The most outstanding news operation of the two Virginias. The 1,000-year flood, remembered, never to be forgotten, because we're all in this together. Brought to you with limited commercial interruption by Raynell Medical Center and Mountaineer Automotive.
Just that we love her and we miss her. There's no word for when you lose a child.
Kind of hard to explain that kind of feeling. I mean, it just kind of churns your gut a little bit there, and not knowing, I think that's the worst part.
It feels like what the flood was named after 1,000 years.
Welcome to this 59 News special report. I'm Tim Carrico.
And I'm Jessica Schuler. The 1,000-year flood, remembered, never to be forgotten.
We're here in White Sulphur Springs, one of the areas devastated by floods nearly a year ago.
The area is still trying to fix the damage. Families still picking up the pieces of their lives.
And right now we're along Howard's Creek here in White Sulphur, where people living along these banks are still trying to pick up the pieces on the road to recovery.
The floods of June 23, 2016 will never be forgotten. 8 to 10 inches of rain fell over a period of 12 hours, forcing creeks and rivers out of their banks. When those waters receded, millions of dollars of damage was done and 23 people were dead. 16-year-old Dakota Stone died after floodwaters swept away his home in White Sulphur Springs. His mother, Natasha Nicely, and grandfather Herschel Nicely also died. 14-year-old Michaela Phillips of White Sulphur Springs was the final person to be found. The Reverend Gary Shoemaker of Raynell died. He was 82. Also from Raynell, Charles Omenchensky and Ishmael Ed Thompson were killed. 93-year-old Denver Barker Sr. of Raynell also died. Both Delmas Parsons and Marguerite Parsons of Rupert were killed, along with their neighbor Nellie Hinkle. In White Sulphur Springs, they're mourning the loss of Belinda Scott, Eleanor Faye Van Puren, and Melissa Decart. Lisa Blankenship of Rennick also was killed, along with 60-year-old Raymond Clark of Caldwell. West Virginia Governor Earl Ray Tomblin declared a state of emergency for 44 of the state's 55 counties because of the flood. He ordered the deployment of 400 members of the West Virginia National Guard. Search and rescue teams were deployed across the state to help pull people from flooded homes, cars, and look for bodies of those who didn't make it.
But just what was it about this storm that made it so deadly?
Storm Tracker 59 meteorologist Mike Slifer explains.
It's a familiar sound in the summer. Rain and thunderstorms are common in West Virginia, but no two storm systems are the same. On June 21st, 2016, a system of storms began pushing their way through West Virginia. It started as broken lines of thunderstorms, but soon grew into a system that left chaos in its wake, including a tornado that touched down in Greenbrier County.
Don't get out on the roadway, we've got another storm coming in.
The next day, 2 more rounds of storms ripped through the state. Rain started to fall, and soon after, flash flood warnings were issued.
Route 60's been closed off now for hours.
Over 10 inches of rain fell in parts of Greenbrier County. On the third day, after rain and winds have already left communities across the state battered, the rain returned, and high water swept through communities throughout southern West Virginia. To understand all of the factors that played into the destruction left by these storms, we have to begin at ground level. To be more precise, ground saturation. The ground has a limit to the amount of water it can store. After 3 days of heavy and continuous rain, the ground had reached its limit. When the water has nowhere else to go, it runs downhill into rivers and streams, leaving sites like this. At 4:40 p.m. on June 23rd, the National Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency across Greenbrier County, one of the most extreme warnings that can be issued. Severe weather always gets all of the attention because it has all the bells and whistles, it has all the oohs and ahs. However, according to the National Weather Service at Blacksburg, flooding across West Virginia has been historically and statistically proven to be most devastating for life and for property.
The flood was full of tragic stories of lives lost due to those swift-moving waters. As we mentioned, 23 people died, most of them from right here in southern West Virginia. One of those stories was that of 14-year-old Michaela Phillips of White Sulphur Springs. She and her siblings were tied together as they tried to forge their way through floodwaters to safety. The strong current snapped the cord they used to tie themselves, and she was swept away. Her body was the last to be found. As you can imagine, for the Phillips family, this year has been hard.
We talked with the family a year later.
Just that we love her and we miss her. And she knows we're rescuing all of her animals for her.
Overcome with emotion, Becky Phillips reflects on the loss of her daughter, Michaela.
There's no word for when you lose a child. There's not one, and it's very hard to explain. If you haven't been through it, you don't know. It is totally different.
She was known for her smile and had a passion for animals. Her ultimate goal? To become a marine biologist. But that dream was cut short at just 14 years old after she was swept away by ravaging floodwaters.
20-minute walk took me 2 hours. In water sometimes up to my waist. And I'm pretty tall, so. And that was just on Main Street.
Becky was on her way home from work. When she arrived, she saw her house was destroyed. She learned that her husband and 3 kids were all tied together by an extension cord, but the flood's current snapped the cord in half, forcing Michaela to drift away while her siblings and father watched in horror. Her body wasn't found until more than a month later by a bloodhound. Now the family's own dogs have been used to cope with this loss.
See, we call her Sissy. That's what we always called Michaela, and so we call her Sissy. So that's just music and the dogs. That's how we do it. All of us, we all just kind of go into separate rooms and turn on what music we want, and that's how we deal.
Their faith and trust in the Lord has also helped the family heal. Here at White Sulphur Springs Baptist Church is where Michaela gave her life to Christ and became a believer.
Well, she had just been saved in February before the flood, and I baptized her 6 weeks just before the flood hit.
Her uncle, Randy Gillum, is the church pastor. He says Michaela was well on her way spiritually.
And she was just growing in the Lord at that point, just getting going. And she was in the water program, which we have here, and just growing with the youth.
The family says they are looking forward to the city's Celebration of Life Festival, aimed at honoring Michaela and the 22 other lives that were lost.
I am. My family's coming in from Tennessee, and we're just going to have a family weekend of remembering and fun and stuff like that.
With the help of 200 National Guardsmen, emergency crews in 8 counties performed swiftwater rescues, search and rescue efforts, and health and welfare checks. They were tasked with helping search for the missing and presumed dead. The focus eventually moved away from the days-long difficult search and rescue process, where residents were helped off of roofs, out of the attics, and shimmied down trees into rescue boats. Through that arduous process, bodies were sometimes found, and the death toll continued to rise.
It's kind of hard to explain that kind of feeling. I mean, it just kind of churns your gut a little bit there, and not knowing, I think that's the worst part. 60 roads were closed, many of them destroyed. Bridges were knocked out, and homes were burned down and washed off foundations.
As we approach the 1-year anniversary for the floods of last June, it's an emotional time for the families who were affected.
Julian Mackey talks with one man about the night that changed his life forever.
While moving into his new house in Hope Village, Ronnie Scott is reminded of the home he shared with his wife Belinda on Mill Hill Drive. That was one of the dozens of homes in White Sulphur Springs destroyed by the June 2016 floods. But it wasn't just his home he lost. His beloved wife and best friend Belinda Scott passed away after severe burns and injuries she sustained from the flood.
I really miss having her to help me hang curtains, and I'm not much good at picking out curtains and bedspreads, but I think she would. Well, I know she's happy with this house, too.
Now he begins a new chapter of his life, moving into his new home in Hope Village with his pal Dancer, the dog he adopted just months after the flood. He plans to move in June 23rd, and he's already making plans to share his 3-bedroom home with his children and grandchildren. Scott says he's amazed at the support and help he and his neighbors received during the recovery process.
You know, there's been a lot of people that's been amazing. I didn't know that many people in the world cared about other people.
All he asks is on the afternoon of June 23rd that everyone take a moment and appreciate their loved ones and the life they have, because he says you never know when everything can change.
I appreciate the way people's volunteered, and they still need, White Sulphur still needs a lot of rebuilding. We still need volunteers.
The damage left behind by the floods came with a huge financial cost for the state. Disasters are expensive. Work is still being done, and repairing the damage will likely add up to several $100 million. The damage to public property is expected to easily exceed $100 million, and a big chunk of that is for highways. Along with roads and bridges, the government will pay for repairs to public buildings, debris cleanup, National Guard service, public health assistance, and school building repairs. Taking a closer look, more than $14 million in debris removal contracts were awarded to local contractors. 90,000 tons of garbage was removed from 8 counties. 679 homes were demolished in 7 counties.
The flood came at huge cost for businesses. One of those businesses was the fish hatchery in White Sulphur Springs. Cameron Leppinger visited the hatchery for an update on their recovery.
Last year's devastating floods left its mark on the state's fish hatchery in White Sulphur Springs. Thousands of fish were washed out and many of the facilities suffered extensive damage.
That's why this hatchery was important to the whole broodstock program, because like I said, we're one of 3 stations. You take one station out of there and the other 2 stations have to pick up the slack.
It was Craig Bachholtz's 4th day on the job when the floods hit. He says the natural disaster caused his job description to change completely.
I went from fish biologist to basically shoveling mud and picking up flood debris with everybody else.
Right now, construction crews are working to restore the hatchery by resurfacing dozens of fish tanks and flooring that were impacted by the flooding.
I was inundated with flood water, and most of the fish were washed out into the stream. So that, as you can see, that was a major impact to our program. And then there's another building, the broodstock building, which also housed another strain of trout. It was also inundated with floodwaters.
Once finished, he says the hatchery will be able to produce at least 8 million fish eggs a year, including rainbow trout and freshwater mussels.
But we've got plans to expand. We're going to bring on maybe an extra strain of trout. So instead of having the 2 that we have now, we're going to try to, with the improvements that we're making to our buildings and the infrastructure, we're going to try to bring a 3rd strain of trout on, possibly some brook trout.
Despite the damage, looting still happened in flood-ravaged communities. Police agencies all across the flood-damaged areas say they saw a lot of looting throughout the town since the floods in June. They told people who live in the area not to leave tools, electronics, or anything of value in their homes.
It may be almost a year since floodwaters devastated parts of southern West Virginia, but for people rebuilding, their work has just begun.
And one of those homes being rebuilt is sitting directly behind us. I talked with this survivor about how she's doing a year later. We first met Lena Hogue 2 days after her life was turned upside down. The June floods had washed away her home and destroyed almost everything she owned. But today, she's rebuilding in the same place her home once sat.
Is it okay if we go in and take a gander?
We were with Lena as she stepped inside her new home for the first time. She's been staying in a 1-room cottage with her husband about 45 minutes away in Greenville.
The house was demoed. We got to be here and watch it come down in March, I think. And the foundation was built, and they started building the house on April 26th.
The Mennonite Disaster Service is donating their time to build Lena's new house. Many of the workers have traveled a long way to lend a hand, but one worker has traveled 4,000 miles from his home in Germany to help people in West Virginia rebuild.
It's definitely an awesome feeling to help them out in this situation. It's also a blessing for me and for them as well. And yeah, I'm glad to do that work, and that's my way to show love.
Howard's Creek sits directly behind Lena's home. When the floods hit last year, water rushed the banks, destroying the homes that stood there. What are you most excited about moving into your new home?
Oh, the fact that I'm going to have 2 bathrooms. My washer and dryer is not going to be in my kitchen. It's going to have its own little room.
It's the little things keeping Lena going now. And as she reflects on how her life has changed, the most important lesson she has learned, patience.
Patience, and to know that you sit back and you wait, God's going to bless you. Don't look over your shoulder at the past and where you've come from. Don't look towards the horizon at what may be, but just you'd be surprised at how much happiness is right in front of your face.
Through all of this devastation, it was hard for people to have hope. But for one woman in Raynell, she was putting her feet toward changing that.
Cindy Jo Salim, also known as Nana, has been walking the streets of Raynell since the floods, praying for everyone impacted. Salim, along with her little sidekick Toby, go up and down every block, praying for people and praying that they find hope. As someone who held on to her life that very night of the floods, she understands the trauma, but wants to show her community they can recover.
For you to lean on and have hope with and show you that things are going to be possible, even though they take a while, you know, that it takes work and effort. I know it was all destroyed in 24 hours. It's not going to be built back. The town, even from the beginning, wasn't built overnight.
She says she will continue walking the streets of Raynell, offering her support to anyone who's in need of a loving hand.
Property damage was extensive through the area.
Even the Greenbrier Resort was hit. We'll have that story and more coming up.
If you'd like to help in flood recovery, you can reach out to wvroad.communityos.org/CMS/home.
Welcome back to this 59 News special presentation, the 1,000-year flood, remembered, never to be forgotten.
We're all in this together. Once the floodwaters receded, the process of recovery began.
Towns and homes were left in ruins. So where did people even start? The people of southern West Virginia wouldn't stay down long. People came from all over the country to help residents get back on their feet. There were a lot of images from the flooding that stuck with people. Remember this. This chilling video comes from Greenbrier County. It was sent to us by Paul Moya. You can see the extremely high water and even a burning house across the street from where this video was taken. We checked back in with Moya and his daughter who lost their home in the flood.
As you can tell, there's a fire across the street there.
It's an iconic video that went viral on social media.
Hoping and praying.
This is video shot by Paul Moya as he was stranded on a roof during the floods last June. Moya was in the neighborhood to let his daughter's dog out when he realized the creek was overflowing its banks. Now a year later, he's revisiting that area and the moments that quickly turned into a nightmare.
You know, we've had those warnings several times in this area, but I never thought I'd see it here in downtown White Sulphur Springs area.
Paul wasn't stranded by himself. After seeing his car washed away, he realized his only option was to stay and help. That's when he met Kimberly Green.
Walked back, I tried to talk her to me, but she couldn't do it. So she said, should I get back in the house? And I asked, do you have a second floor? And she said, yes. And I thought, okay. Well, about that time, I thought, well, I can't just leave her here. And my exit point was gone by then. So it's not like I was scared or, wasn't scared. I was scared, but I wasn't going to panic. I was at the first Gulf War. I didn't panic then. I'm still here today.
A year later, what goes through your head?
Well, it still comes back, And like anything, like I said, during the first Gulf War coming back, after a couple of years, things started, getting to me, that post-traumatic stress. And so like I told Kimberly and the folks in this neighborhood, especially those that have lost loved ones, you have to talk to somebody, whether it's a professional, your family, your friends, you have to talk with someone. And getting the story out, I appreciate you guys doing this. What we would really like to do is capture the rebirth of this town. We haven't given up. Nobody's given up. City Council, we're working with them to try to get this celebration of life and rebirth back to the community.
Rescue squads are taxed to the max in these dire situations. So help came from all walks of life. Sean Riley and Richard Perkins are raft guides for Adventures on the Gorge. They took their skills to the water to help save lives. The two rafters were able to rescue a litter of puppies from a home in Raynell. We decided to catch back up with rafters with Ace, who helped in efforts like this one, to see just what motivated them to get in the kayaks and hit the water. Stephen Reed says the Ace rafters were running rescue missions in Raynell from 10 at night until 10 in the morning. They spent the night rescuing people and animals from their flooded homes.
In the course of all of that, to see a smile on their face, just kind of even in the worst of times, that was probably one of the neatest things, and just watching people's whole worlds get ripped apart. And the fact that, they were still able to smile and give you a hug when you put them on dry land.
Reed says the flood rescue was a team effort with other local rafting companies. He tells us anytime there's a major flood in the area, his team is ready to help out. A lot of people lost almost everything they had in the floodwaters, from clothes to furniture to mementos and pictures.
One man made it his mission to help restore what they could.
He's known for the iconic images at the Greenbrier Resort, but last year after the floods, photographer Mike Wyatt used his talents to help people who lost everything.
And my wife found a bunch of family pictures that were just coated with mud. And she's like, can't we do something? And so having a darkroom. From the darkroom days, we took stuff back and washed it.
They took those pictures back to their home where Mike has the proper equipment to bring back the shine these photos once had. And while you might think washing them would damage the photos, that's actually the secret to their longevity.
It's just like went viral, basically. We started having all the requests to do, and we were washing prints from about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning till midnight every day.
The demand grew so fast, Wyatt had to think outside the box to restore the nearly 25,000 photos.
So my darkroom equipment wasn't enough, so we bought a wading pool from Walmart, and we filled it up with water, and we just started washing and drying. And the screens that we normally dried on, because with my darkroom we dried on fiberglass screens, which were similar to house screens. So we ended up taking all the screens from our house and drying on those. It was an outside project, and when we started we didn't have light, any electricity, so we're using lanterns at night, and so it's kind of interesting. But I just started bringing people in. It became a project more of my family's than of mine. But
something filled with so many devastating images, some say Wyatt's act of kindness is picture perfect.
And of course it was, everyone else was doing their part with what they could. And it was something we weren't charging for. It's just something that we could do to help, and that's just kind of what we felt we needed to do it. So.
Volunteers from all over the country traveled to Greenbrier County to help residents get back on their feet. One organization visited from Pennsylvania. They helped build homes in Hope Village, the neighborhood constructed to house displaced flood victims. The Mennonite Disaster Service Organization began building homes in the neighborhood in July. Since their arrival, they've built several new homes. We caught up with some of the families moving into these homes. Those we talked with say they're thankful for the help from so many volunteers.
I just want to thank everybody that put this together, because you don't hear about these type of things ever, and we've had floods here before and nothing's ever happened like this before, and I just think it's an awesome thing that they did.
Many of the homes were furnished with items like sofas, tables, and bedding donated by Grand's Home Furnishings. Volunteers with the Appalachia Service Project spent months in the area helping people get back on their feet.
Greenbrier West coach Russ Gilkerson and his wife Becky received keys to the home that was completed back in October. Tragedy came only 2 days after the family received that home. Russ Gilkerson would die suddenly before they got a chance to spend a night in the home. For the mayor of White Sulphur Springs, the floods weren't the only loss he suffered that fateful day. Lloyd Haynes lost his wife after she became sick.
The past several months have not only been a time for the city to recover, but also a time for him to heal from his loss.
As the one-year anniversary of the flood inches closer, Kimmerl Eppinger talks with the mayor and brings us more.
Last year's devastating floods hit hard in the city of White Sulphur Springs. More than 100 homes damaged, at least 6 people from the area killed.
The impact on the city was even worse. It seems like that if you take a look at it, it looked like a third world country to begin with, and it seemed to most people like we're not going to get through it.
Lloyd Haynes is the city mayor and has been for the past 4 years. During the time of the floods, he along with his city suffered a tremendous loss. 2 days after the floods, his wife died after the two had been married for 54 years.
Something that was excruciating, but things were moving so fast, and there was so much to do, and there were so many people, different people, that were experiencing problems and misery, that I didn't take time to think about myself.
Haynes says there is no time to grieve, but as the year anniversary of the floods inches closer, he says there are greater plans for the city to move past the tragedy.
We want people to realize that even though the flood was devastating, and it wasn't a good thing they lived through, but there's hope. You know, we're not standing still, we're going forward.
Getting back into a home is not easy, but help is available.
Find out how some are finding their way back into a stable place. That's when we return.
If you need help recovering from the 1,000-year flood, you can go online. Visit greenbrier.com/neighbors.